And I see recording. So, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. We had tremendous interest in this event. Over 100 people are registered, and I'd love to see all of them this evening. I'm Barbara Stahura. I'm the co-chair of TTN New York City's Event Planning Committee. And just a minute to tell you about TTN. We're a nonprofit founded here in New York City, focused on women 50 and beyond. And our mission is to connect women with similar interests and passions, including a love of literature, which is why many of our TTNers are here this evening. Our popular in-person programs where authors would meet with us, read their work, discuss their books, have, of course, moved to Zoom. So that's why we're all here today. Our New York City chapter shares our literary events with the 14 chapters of TTN around the country. And since last fall, we've partnered with WNBA to offer programs, which I think is just great. And now I'd like to introduce Rachel, who will tell you a little bit about WNBA.
Thank you, Barbara. Good evening, everybody. My name is Rachel Slayman. I am the president of the Women's National Book Association New York City chapter. Just glancing through all of the people that had registered, I am seeing some old faces. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. I am very happy that you all are here. The Women's National Book Association was founded in 1917, over 100 years ago, where women were not allowed in the men's organization. So women had said, guess what? We're making our own. And ever since then, it has taken off. As everybody knows, with women's rights, women are in power more often than they have been even in the last decade and beyond. Our organization focuses on connecting, educating, leading, and advocating for women. And I could talk more, but we have this wonderful panel to get to. So I am going to turn it over to Laurel Stokes. She is the immediate past president of the organization, which she will tell you just a little odds and ends for the panel. Laurel.
Hi, everyone. We have a sold out event tonight with over 100 people. So I just want to make sure that we remain muted, that we turn off video if we're not presenting, and don't forget to leave any questions that you have in the chat. We will look at those at the end and try to answer as many as we can. So welcome, and without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator, Harriet, who is both a board member of the Women's National Book Association and the poet in resident at the Transition Network. So thank you, Harriet, for hosting, and thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to a wonderful event. Harriet, you're muted.
Or
Actually unmute yourself.
can't.
Oh no.
Oh, now I
Muted again.
muted me. You are muted, it says.
We
You're
can
not-
hear you now.
You're good.
I'm good? Okay,
Yes.
I just want to warn everybody that my bandwidth is unstable. And if I should freeze, Laurel will jump in. She has the questions too, because there were 2 Verizon trucks down the street today trying to fix the Verizon cable and the Wi-Fi, so.
Coming
All
from,
right.
I have to say, coming from a poet, that sounds like a metaphor, Harriet.
Maybe it is.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'd just like to introduce our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate. And everybody has seen the bios, which are on the site, but I will just highlight a few things for each person. So Clavis Natera was born in the Dominican Republic, and she's grew up in Harlem. She's a co-founder of Love as a Kind of Cure and the November 2020 Virtual Arts Festival honoring Native Americans. And Clavis is coming out with a new debut novel in 2022 called Neruda on the Park. And hopefully Clavis will be able to tell us a little bit about that book and that intriguing title. Okay, I also want to welcome Deborah Magpie Erling. Deborah is a professor of English at the University of Montana. She teaches fiction and Native American studies full-time, and she's of the Bitterroot Salish tribe. And she's done some wonderful hybrid work with Native American culture and photography. Maybe she'll tell us about it. And she's also written a book of fiction. So we're hoping to hear about that too, and also about her wonderful students at the University of Montana. I'd like to also introduce Sally Woolford Gerard. She's the director of the nonprofit Literary Agents of
Change. And I have Union Literary Agency. I don't know what else she was going to say. And Deborah has her second novel coming out, lead title for Milkweed in 2022.
Okay, well, it seems like Harriet's prediction of cable issues came true. So until we get her back, I guess I will do my best to continue on. So how about we start with you continuing to tell us more about yourself? If there's anything else that you would like to highlight in your career.
Oh, I don't know what else was going to be in there, but why don't we just move over to Eric?
Okay, Eric, kicking it over to you.
Hi, I'm Eric Simonoff. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a literary agent at WME, and I represent a fairly wide variety of literary fiction, narrative nonfiction, and history.
Okay, and then did we miss anyone? I was unfortunately busy.
No,
letting
that's the four.
That was
Yeah.
everyone? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, then let's kick things off until we get Harriet back. How did the process for agenting, editing, teaching change with COVID? What were you doing before, and how did things shift after? I know I've had to make adjustments myself. So how about we start with Deborah?
Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. I found teaching to be oddly that little oasis out in like a connection, a place of connection. And I was teaching a class called Flights. It was based on Olga Tokarczuk's wonder novel. And so I had my students take flights and just do something different as all graduate students. But we sat together outside under a wedding tent. And, it was kind of a gathering in the fall. They met me in my backyard, and then we moved to the wedding tent. And we were going to stay there till the bitter cold hit. And it was supposed to be, I think they bailed out on me when it got to be 30 degrees. And some of the wedding tents started to collapse. But I have to say that one of the things that I've noticed, certainly, and I've always said this about readings, and I tell my students, that the living breath is really important. Your breath is a, you know, sacred thing. And so when you're storytelling or when you're connecting with others, your voice is, you know, a powerful tool. However, I didn't realize how powerful it was and how powerful breath is and pheromones and the kind of energy that we pass to one another just through our breath. And I've noticed that even when I gather with my friends around campfires or when I gathered with my students under that tent, I didn't get that hit of adrenaline from something that was exciting. I didn't get that from their voice because I wasn't, none of us were participating in in that communion of breath. So I feel like we've missed out so much, and I didn't know that connection was so essential to living. So, but I think connecting with those students was the most important thing. Like it was a life raft, and they felt the same way. I know I could feel their, you know.
Clivis also has students. Clivis?
Hi. I do also have students. So I'll go next, I guess.
Yeah, well, you can talk about your students, yeah.
Well, I think the question that Laurel, I know you left, you got cut off, Harriet, but Laurel just asked us, you know, how our processes and our careers changed
Yes.
because of the pandemic. So I think we're answering that.
Oh, okay.
So, well, so hi, everybody. Very happy to see all of you. Well, to see you before you turn your cameras off. It's really lovely to be here. You know, for me, I mean, I think my process was changed very drastically. I had a full-time job. I worked in corporate America, had been working there for 20 years, and was doing my writing on the side. I was waiting to, you know, sell my book. I have an agent. We had been working on my book for about 6 months when the pandemic hit, and I have 2 young school-aged children. And so when the pandemic hit, it was like all of a sudden the kids are home full time. My work is insane. And so I very quickly realized that it was not realistic for me that I could continue to do my writing the way I had until then, because I was getting up at 5 a.m. and working, and it just wasn't gonna work for me. And so I ended up deciding to leave my employment in the summer, and you know, to take time to actually dedicate myself full time to my writing. Don't worry about me though. I actually sold my book 3 months later. So there's something to be said about taking that leap, which to be honest with you, I don't think if it hadn't been for the pandemic, I would have kept, you know, crawling along with my revision. And, you know, I'm now teaching, I teach at St. Joseph's in their MFA program, which was something I would have, you know, I wanted to eventually get to teaching, but there was no way to do it with a full-time job. So for me, even though the pandemic was this terribly traumatic event. I've lost family members to this pandemic, and have some really sick family members still. For me personally, it really ended up being this incredible opportunity to like really look closely at what I wanted to do with my life and like do what I actually wanted to do. And I'm privileged in a way that I was able to do it.
That's fabulous. Anybody else want to chime in with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Sally?
mean, I think agenting, you know, agenting has been just as busy as it was last year, if not busier, but the pace is slower. Like when I used to send out a manuscript to a bunch of editors, if I didn't hear in 24 hours that somebody was really excited, I think, oh, that's not going to go anywhere, that project. But now, you know, I talked to one editorial director with 3 little kids at home, and I said, well, when do you read? His answer was, I read between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m., period. So, you know, it's taking people, the appetite for books are there, just taking people longer, you know, and to get other reads, and, you know, everyone's scattered around and having their telephone calls and Zoom. So it's just, you know, I think I've learned patience in this pandemic year. You know, there's a pandemic pace.
That's interesting. Eric?
Yeah, as Sally said, it's been very busy. It's been strangely busy, and the publishing industry discovered that we can do pretty much every aspect of our various jobs from home, not always with ease, and it really depends on circumstance, how much room you're living in, whether you have small children at home, whether you have teenagers. I have a lot of clients and friends with teenagers who are really struggling because it's hard enough having teenagers, having raised two myself. And to have teenagers in a small apartment in New York City with the moodiness and the being cut off from their social lives, that kind of thing. On the other hand, I will say that publishing is a very social business. And during pre-COVID times, it would not be unusual to have a business lunch with an editor 4 or 5 times a week. And at the time I was living in Brooklyn, I'm now in northeastern Pennsylvania. If you add commute time plus an hour and a half business lunch in the middle of the day, it's as if some of us have been gifted 2.5 extra productive hours in our workday, which is meaningful. So it's been up and down. I miss the liveliness of contact with colleagues and clients and editors, and just the mix of the intergenerational mix of people that you get when you're actually in an office. But it does actually focus the concentration, strangely enough.
Yeah, I mean, I've had sort of walking dates with people, with scouts, literary scouts, are paid by foreign publishers and film companies to report back on things happening in New York publishing. And I treasured it, really treasured any little crumb of social interaction.
Yeah. So let's get to the subject of reading and how reading has taken on any new significance in this time. And I would like to say that the crisis is not only the pandemic, but the crisis is domestic terrorism, and the crisis is the Black Lives Matter issues. In just 1 year, we have had several very significant crises. So I love this little quote from Emily Dickinson, where she says, "There is no frigate like a book." And I wondered what you think she meant by that. Anybody? Sally?
I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? I mean, a book will take you anywhere you want to go, right? It's better than a frigate because there aren't any actual limits on it. You can go to Mars reading a book. But I don't know, maybe do other people have different interpretations?
Other interpretations? Deborah? You're muted, Deborah, you're muted, and so are you, Clavis.
I'm muting for a while. I find Emily Dickinson problematic as a native writer, but I think like Sally, you can, a book certainly during this pandemic time has been, to me, like again, like an island of calm and sanity, a place where you can go and just really be lost. And, and I think that's certainly what we've needed is to have some calm and some peace, some serenity. And I find, Netflix was great at watching all of it, but there was nothing like a book. So I think that speaks to, so much right now, the power of story, the power of storytelling, within a book. And, I found myself more than ever, I've always loved beautiful sentences, but just to love the sentence again, just to love old books. I felt that I was fortunate that I, didn't have to be out on the front line working. So, I found, my books again, when you're teaching, you don't often get to go and really relish your books. And I just find all of my books such a treasure. I think about those people who are the minimalists that do many. I thought they must have sad lives because you get rid of all your books. And I love my books. They're stacked everywhere. So and just the treasure to rediscover them actually.
Yeah, I found that the first 2 months though,
Sally?
the first 2 months I couldn't sit still to read. I plowed through audiobooks, but after the first couple months, I could actually sit down and, lose myself in a book again.
Yeah, a lot of people say that. I must say that somehow they lost their concentration.
Yeah, no,
And
it just
they didn't have the
physically,
patience.
so, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, I've been asked what Sally said. Books are a form of transportation. There are two major adult book fairs, international book fairs each year. The London Book Fair, which takes place in the spring, and the Frankfurt Book Fair, which takes place in the fall. And up until the moment of shutdown a year ago, we were still debating whether we were going to be going to the London Book Fair, which was, I think, last year supposed to be in late March. And the fair was really slow in actually canceling itself, but people began pulling out. The major publishers were pulling out. We finally pulled out, and of course, the fair was ultimately canceled. And we all really missed it because it's a gathering of people who love books, who are in the publishing industry from all over the world, twice a year in London and Frankfurt. But I also really missed London. So over the holidays, I actually went back to Mrs. Dalloway, which is such a geographically specific book. And to walk the streets of London with Mrs. Dalloway was as close as travel as I've come in the last 12 months. So it's a literalization of the Emily Dickinson quote.
Anybody else? You know that,
I'll
Yeah.
add a couple of thoughts. You know, one thing that I've been really thinking about quite a bit is how like books that are created during a crisis just speak to us in such deep ways. And when you think about like the books that have been coming out, I would say probably in the last 6 months, certainly the last 9 months since the pandemic hit. Well, now it's been a year. I don't even know how long this has been going on. But, you know, I was thinking how most of those books, because of the way publishing works, right? It usually takes about 1.5 years, 2 years after you sell a book for the book to make its way into the world. So a lot of the books that we're reading now are books that were written during the Trump presidency. And I just have to say, like, I feel just this incredible sense of like the generosity of what happens between writers and readers, as a reader and as a writer, because so much of what's coming out in the last year is just so powerful and rich. And I think a lot of times about the ways in which all that time that, you know, people were distraught because of the crises that were already happening in this country. And so you know, when I was thinking about this question, Harriet, and about the way that, you know, words can transport us, the way that books can be a vessel of some sort, I always think about the fact that, you know, the best art is the art that speaks to a current moment and that will resonate long after it. And so I've just been really floored with the kinds of incredible books. And much like Sally, I spent the first 2 months, you know, having a really hard time. I was trying to revise this book I wanted to sell. And reading has always been such an important part of me finding peace in the world. And, you know, when I couldn't do it, I felt like I was losing my mind. So I was really glad when I was able to sit still. And I feel like the last year has been probably one of the most rich years. And it's all new fiction that I'm reading and nonfiction. So there's a lot of really good books. So for any of you that are, I brought a little stack that I'll show before this is over, because I think it's a wonderful thing to just recommend books and make your way through. If you're having a hard time reading, sit down and try each day, try a little bit more, because once you get back into it, it's such a gift.
and Eric mentioned Mrs. Dalloway, I think. And one of the things that people are doing, book clubs, is going back to the classics. I know I'm in one book club and we chose Anna Karenina. And we were reading Anna Karenina, but of course with a new, more contemporary eye. So, and I know I know you love Toni Morrison and Gabriel Garcia. The little birdie told me that, Clavis. Yeah, yeah. But just to get back to Emily Dickinson, that's part of a poem. And in the poem, what she also says about being transported by reading is that anybody can be transported, even the poorest soul. So she was thinking about that way back then, that it's an equal opportunity vehicle, and that all kinds of people can read books and be transported, even though in their lives they may not be able to go to a particular place. The other interesting thing is if you look up the word frigate, it's a war. It's a war vessel. But she didn't mean that, but it could mean a war vessel. So there is the opportunity in this kind of pandemic and all the things that are happening to use literature, both in writing and in reading, as some form of defiance. What do you think about that? Anybody? Clevis?
You come right to me, right?
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I do think that I think literature has the power to transform the world. I think that's part of the reason why the four of us are you know, in this business. We believe deeply in the power of books. And you know, you're talking about my love, and I have a deep love of, you know, Toni Morrison is one of my biggest you know, heroes of all time. And I think about her books and the ways they've revolutionized the way that, you know, we've become conscious, right? Of like how many writers before her were like very focused on the white gaze and writing for even some of the most powerful and beloved writers, right? And so this idea of like writing from a place of love for your community, from your community to your community, was revolutionary and continues to be for those of us who are writing from the margins. And so to me, I just think that there's something that we can do for each other in inviting stories from people who aren't like us, or who, and I mean, for me, like that's poets, you know, Deborah, like, you know, I love fiction. I love nonfiction. I love memoirs. But for me, it's been really tough to like get into poetry. And that's one of the things I welcomed into my life in the last year. And I'm now like, I can't even believe it took me this long to read. Like, I mean, I read poetry when I was in college. I was an English major, but it just took me a long time to get into it. And now that I'm into it, I'm like, what a gift, because I'm seeing possibilities in language that revolutionize the way I think about my existence. And I understand the way I'm making my way through the world. And that's what literature, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about revolution. We're talking about enabling each other to see the world in different ways. And what else? I mean, what else can we do in our lives? Movies, I think, music, yes, art forms do it. But the way that books do it, the way that language can do it, to me, it's just, it's truly transformative.
Deborah, I wonder about stories. You're not muted. You're muted, Deborah. I wonder about stories in Native American culture, ancestral stories, the tradition of stories that go way back.
Well, I can't speak to many Native traditions. I can speak to my own. And, you know, storytelling, I think it's interesting because I think Joan Didion said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And I think that that's true of Native cultures. Like we are forbidden to tell coyote stories in the summer months, in the warm months, and those stories are told in the wintertime. And I think there's a really good reason for that. Besides, there's sacred reasons for that. It said that the rattler protects the story. So if you tell a story, you'll be bitten by a rattler out of season. But the thing that stories allow us to survive, like in the coldest times, and when people were, you know, had to be like isolated, and you know they were hungry. One of the things that happened was they could have storytellers who would lift them up from the darkness of their hunger, from the cold, from just the dark environment. So stories have always had the ability to connect us with others. And I teach a storytelling class at the University of Montana. And in that stories, I found that, you know, there's, in this community, racism surrounds Native people, and the University of Montana sits on Bitterroot Salish traditional homeland. And so a lot of the students are uncomfortable by that. And I, push that discomfort and ask them, like I've actually said, this is the traditional homeland of my people who invited you here. Like, where is your invitation? And that's like really to be aware of, not only like we acknowledge that this is the homeland, but really it is still, that we are still living people and it's still our traditional homeland. But the one thing that starts to break down those kinds of cultural misinterpretations or cross-cultural misinterpretations is stories. And if you start telling, we all connect through stories. We all have. So I had my students read literature and then not talk about it in theoretical terms, but talk about it in terms of their own family members, like The Death of Jim Loney by James Welch. What family member have you wanted to save? So those kinds of things are, I find that once students begin to tell stories, it begins to break down something. But we haven't had much of an opportunity to tell stories. And so that class, some of those students would come to that class and be so excited because in their own families, they don't have a storytelling tradition. And so, I think it's just really an important thing. And I hope over this pandemic that people have been able to Zoom and tell some stories or gather in that way.
Yeah, very interesting. Eric and Sally, what about, I know you said that it's been pretty busy and you've been able to sell and market books. I read one, the sales are up.
8%
in
in
publishing,
2020.
which is astonishing. In fiction, do you find that there is a certain type of fiction that is more popular now during the pandemic than it perhaps has been before? Fantasy or whatever?
Oh, I think it's pretty across the board.
Yeah.
Book by book. I mean, it's like, here, Black Lives Matter has helped. I mean, we had a book that popped on the bestseller list that was exciting. It was a great book, though. So, it just it depends on the book. I mean, Bridgerton, I don't know if any of you watched Bridgerton, but that did not lead to a giant bump in historic romance. It led to a big bump for Julie Quinn, I asked a friend who does romance. I don't handle romance novels, but I asked someone. So, I think, the industry's been pretty polarized for a while. The really special books, people, are going to find their audience one way or the other. And I'm not just talking about it, a big advance, because there's actually not much of a correlation between what a book does and the advance. The advance is a reflection of what Random House thinks they can do with a book. But I don't know. Eric, what about you? I just think like great books are in demand, and they were in demand last year too. So
Yeah, I would agree. It's because it's such a slow lumbering business. It's a very hard business to spot trends in. I think it was Davis was saying it takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months from the time a manuscript is finished before you actually see it in a bookstore. So it's just very hard to predict. Imagine in February of 20, trying to imagine where we'd be in March of 21. We would have all been wrong, for one thing.
Yeah.
And now try to imagine in March of 21 where we're going to be in April of 22 or September of 22. It's just it doesn't pay to try to guess. So it makes sense to focus on, as Sally said, just the best work you can find and amplify and promote.
Well, something very interesting. I looked at the New York Times bestseller. I think it was last week. And the #1 fiction bestseller, I forgot the name of it, something about wind, is about the Depression, the Great Depression.
Oh, yeah. Kristen Hanna's novel.
Yeah. And that sort of startled me. Like, why would people want to read about the Great Depression in a time of the pandemic? Do you have any thought about why that has become the #1 bestseller?
I think, first of all, Kristen Hanna's, all her books end up being big bestsellers. So that gives her an advantage. But I I think people like, it's inspiring to read of other people's struggles, struggling and overcoming these monumental problems or challenges in life.
Eric, what do you think?
She's, as Sally said, a hugely successful best-selling author.
So it's more the author than the subject.
I think in the case of Kristen Hanna, I mean, the book got phenomenal reviews as well. It was extremely well received. So I think it was probably a combination of things. It's, I mean, if you look, well, for one thing, if you look at the bestseller list, you see a lot of the same names we've been seeing for the last 30 years.
Yes, Patterson.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
Christian
mhm.
Patterson, Danielle Steele, Nora Roberts,
Yes.
et cetera. I mean, they take up usually on any given week, if there are 15 slots in the hardcover fiction,
True.
they take up 12. Would you say, Sally?
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's some new names that can kind of break through the noise and make a meaningful impact. I mean, Britt Bennett's book Vanishing Half, which is an incredible book, was both a critical success and a huge commercial success in 2020. It continues to sell. So there are certain books that just lodge themselves on the list, like Britt Bennett's book, and then there are really good books that get a groundswell of critical attention and pop up on the list for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, but just enough to really enter the consciousness of people who read literary fiction, which usually carries over to when their paperbacks are published.
Yep.
It's almost as if the hardcover is an out-of-town run from when the paperback comes out, and all the book groups all over the country can say, "Oh, I remember that book from a year ago."
And the publisher can paste New York Times bestseller on the book. It doesn't matter if it was 1 week or 40 weeks.
How do you account for the Crawdad book? That's been on the bestseller for months and months and months, and I can't quite understand it.
Yeah, yeah, I read it once it was on the bestseller list for a few months, and I don't know. I think people found her an appealing character. There were enough twists and turns, and it was, you know, the swamp was kind of fun to read about. You know, that sort of, speaking of traveling to, you know, life in a swamp. I don't know.
How about you, Eric? Do you have a theory about that book?
Well, you know, the really big intangible in all of this is word of mouth. There wasn't really. I don't think you can really point to any, unless I'm forgetting it, any one big media hit that propelled that book the way.
No, I don't.
I don't think, it didn't have a particularly big advance as far as I know. It had a modest advance. It just really caught on. And then once it became the book that everyone was reading, it becomes a very self-perpetuating thing where people say, "Oh, have you read the one book that everybody's reading?" And if, you know, first of all, most people in America don't read any books in a given year. And then there's a larger portion that reads maybe 1 or 2 books a year. And those people want to know, what's the one book a year I should read? And these books sort of emerge as the one books, and it's been Crawdad for the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Do you think book clubs have blossomed in this time of the pandemic?
Was Deborah trying to weigh in? You're on mute.
Oh, Deborah.
To say, you were talking, Eric, about you know, kind of set word of mouth, and I know that Ivan Doig, when he had House Made of Sky, which became like really a bestseller, he actually bought his own books and then drove all over and went into booksellers and talked about his book and actually made that, you know, and then all of his books sold really, really well. And I think that's such a good idea, isn't it? I mean, you know, to get out there and shake people's hands and talk to people, really a good idea. I don't think we do that.
Is he charismatic? I've never met him.
Ivan Doig, he was a good storyteller. I don't necessarily think he was charismatic, but he was kind of down to earth and very likable, I guess. Yeah.
But you couldn't do that today because of the pandemic. You couldn't go around shaking people's hands.
No.
No.
I was gonna say, Deborah, thanks for the tip. I'm gonna write that down and hope that I can get my card next year when my book comes out.
Right.
I mean, probably social media is an effective tool too, right? With Instagram and finding your tribe.
Mhm.
Somebody had asked that question I saw pop up. It was, how do you find your audience? And I don't know whether that's like when you're writing, if that question, how do you find your audience? Because I think, that was a question that I had. I don't know if you had that, Clavis, but one of the things that I had when I was writing was people would ask me, well, what is this? Sweetgrass, people didn't know what that was. And should I explain it? But if I explained it, then that wasn't good for my own people. But if I didn't, then people really didn't know what I was talking about. But I think I settled on, I don't care, keep writing and maybe they'll get it. So.
Do you have something that has a phone in the center of your screen?
Me?
iPhone?
There's
Oh,
there's
okay.
someone, another, they're muted now, I think.
Oh, okay. So we come to the time where I think that we want to actually open it up to questions, because the audience, I'm sure, has a lot of questions. But I just like,
Harriet, I actually wrote down all the questions as everybody was putting them in the chat. So if you're like me, that you have been frozen, I guess I'll lead the questions that have been from the chat. I just realized it's amazing how everybody's nice profile when the Zoom freezes. I've always found that very interesting. But also has been interesting is this discussion. And one question that did come up to our panelists, if anybody wants to jump in, do literary scouts only work with manuscripts before publication? And can well-reviewed small press books get considered for film and translation? Interesting. If anybody wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Eric and I'm sure we have that covered, right, Eric? They're sort of like the bees in the publishing garden, right? Gathering information and news, and they've got relationships with agents and with editors and with rights people. And they hear about something on submission before you even have an offer much of the time. And if it's something, most scouts will ask nicely for a copy of a manuscript. Some will just try to get their hands on it. And it's so easy now, because you used to have to bribe an assistant to Xerox something for you. Now someone just pushes a button and they get it. But they're very helpful. They'll, especially when they love a book, they'll really champion the book to their clients and to their film clients and foreign clients. Yeah, and I think film agents keep an eye on independent press books too, but it's usually when they start to perform.
Did any other panelists want to weigh in?
I mean, there's a hunger for material in Hollywood for sure. And as Sally was alluding to, there's a whole ecosystem of people who just represent underlying literary material and try to get it set up as television and film. That is very trend driven. They suddenly everybody wants the same kind of thing and they all chase after the same kind of thing. But there's certainly cases in which books that were not necessarily high profile when they came out are rediscovered, and then suddenly everyone clamors for a book that came out 10 or 15 years ago. And when you think about the life cycle of a book, Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale came out in what, 85 or 86?
Yeah. Yeah.
Took over 30 years before it became a hugely successful television series. There are all kinds of stories like that. I will say though that the only thing I've encountered that seems a little bit more rigid than the children's book business, which I've dabbled in, but I've decided I am no expert at, is the book to film, book to TV world, because they're just all these like ironclad pronouncements they make about, oh, no one wants to do that right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then you say, well, what about this and that and this and that? Say, oh, those are exceptions. So for instance, one thing that we hear all the time is, oh, nobody wants period. And I'll say, what about Bridgerton? And what about Queen's Gambit, which was period? And what about like the 75 shows I can think of that were periods? Like, well, those all happen for the following reasons. So it is a world, I think more so than Sally's world and mine, of selling books to publishers where there's a whole lot of no happening.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh, definitely. and
Part of it
then-
is also just the way, how you package something. I mean, I'm selling a novel now that I really love, and the film agent who's amazing, but she's like, oh, this is a feminist neo-Western, and that's really hot right now. I'm like, great. You know, it's not how I would have described the book, but okay. So,
Very, very interesting. You can never know what could surface 30 years after it's been original idea and what could post in 2 minutes. It's an interesting world we live in. And on that same note, to the panelists, do you think tactile book culture will die?
I have a
I-
prediction that it will never die. You know, I remember
yes.
I remember when so I got my MFA from NYU maybe 15 years ago. And at that time, the Kindle was becoming this big thing. And I was heartbroken because I was convinced that by the time I finished the book and sold the book, there would be no paper books. Like we were all gonna be in electronic form. And when I think about what has happened with social media and how like everybody's holding these books now, and it brings me a lot of joy as a writer. As a reader, I love holding a book. And so yes, I still have my Kindle, you know, and when I'm traveling, I'll put a bunch of books in it. But I still, I think we worry about that as readers and writers, but I just think there's always going to be this desire to hold a book in your hand. There's nothing like it.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. I agree.
I think we all can agree. And we thank everyone for reading books. Do the agents accept blind submissions? That was another question from our audience. I think that may be a little bit of a loaded question, but if anybody can give a short answer.
You know, it's people, I have a sort of dedicated email address and people send the unsolicited manuscripts and a letter. And once in a while, I mean, you know, I'll read through the letters, and if it's really convincing, I'll pull it out and read it or give it to a reader at the office. But yeah, I mean, I found maybe 2 authors in they call it the slush pile, but you know, because people, I mean, I see people it's so easy to submit it now. I mean, I've gotten a manuscript and it'll have like 100 agents and it's in the, you know, and I can see who else they sent it to. And it's like, you know, and in a way that gets you off the hook. If you don't like it, you don't really feel like you have to spend time crafting a thoughtful response, you know. It's like a mass mailing, so. Yeah, I mean, it's hard too. I mean, you know, I know Eric has a very full list. I have a full list, especially, you know, with not having my assistant at my elbow working at home, you know, it's just, yeah.
I will say that I'd be lying if I said no, as tempted as I am to say no. The reality is the most exciting part of Sally's and my job is discovery and being in on the ground floor of an amazing career. The second reality is it doesn't happen all that often. Between taking on Yad Jesse's first novel, Homegoing, and Megha Majumdar's first novel, A Burning, I think 4 years went by where I didn't take anything on. Not because I wasn't looking. I didn't find that one thing that was like a lightning strike. And then I took on 3 things in quick succession, and then another year went by when I didn't take anything on. So the last time I took something on was a year ago, March, and I just took on a new writer about a month and a half ago. So it's not that I'm not reading query letters. I read them all day long. It's just that it's really hard to break through the noise. I will say that the writing a really good query letter, which isn't often discussed in classes and whatnot, is incredibly important. As if you can train yourself to write succinctly, convincingly, and eloquently about your own writing and about your book and about your own intentionality, it goes a long way to getting the attention of the agent.
Yep, and to have sort of, you know, comparable titles that are really accurate. That helps too. You know, I mean, this thing I pulled out of the slush pile, the author compared herself to Dan Woodrell, and she delivered, you know, so I mean, that really, it's a good shorthand, I think.
Could you two, Eric and Sally, could you talk to the audience? Because I think there's a question about what does it mean to have unsolicited versus solicited? Was it, you know, that's kind of unclear.
Yes, there are so many great questions coming up. I'm trying to keep track of everybody.
Yeah, so solicited just means that we reach out to the author, because say, Deborah, you say like, oh, this student of mine's amazing, has written an amazing book, and so I would contact that person. Or if I read a short story in Kenyon Review or something, I might write that author. I'm soliciting the manuscript. Unsolicited is just your name's been picked out of a hat and they send it, just cold with the letter.
Thank you.
If we can go with another question, are collections of flash fictions worthy of publication? Hope I didn't get tongue twisted with that.
Yeah, I mean, if they're amazing flash fiction stories, sure. I mean, short stories aren't the easiest category.
No, I would say they are challenging. You're getting so much detail in so little time, but you don't want to put too much detail or not enough that the story is incomplete. So it would definitely be definitely a very good balance.
What about, can I ask, what
Okay.
about literary fiction versus mainstream fiction?
I think that hopefully there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah,
You know, we're all looking for something, you know, beautifully written and characters you care about, and you know, a story that's
Sellable.
going to be,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
I want to bring up one question here that was kind of in a lot of talk. Desire to search for work underrepresented voices in the literary community. I know there's been lots of talk with trying to get so much diversity, and everybody needs to, you know, we're a lot of accepting everybody these days. So I guess the question is there still a desire that people want to read it? You know, I mean, I know so many things go into with an agent, you know, like many of the panelists had mentioned, you know, a great query letter, a good hook, the comparable books themselves, but trying to get that underrepresented community. I guess, how do people get to that audience, or how does that audience get to the main audience?
Oh, I think there's a real hunt for diverse voices and own voices now. I mean, it's a plus.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, Eric, don't you think it's, you know, I mean, publishers want.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the challenge that we're confronting is how incredibly white the publishing industry is. And it's a conversation that I've been having within my own company about the entertainment industry for the past 12 years. And I'm ashamed to say, very little change. And I've seen more change in the past 8 to 10 months than I probably did in the 12 years leading up to it. But when you have gatekeepers who are all from basically one kind of background, it's going to limit the pipeline for the kind of material those gatekeepers are going to be admitting. So it's been a longstanding problem. It continues to be a problem, but I think that there is, and always has been, a subset of agents and editors who have wanted to engage with the best work from every possible place.
I mean, publishers are looking to diverse their ranks, and this nonprofit agents have changed. Like, we're funding paid internships for people of color, Black students, you know, just because the way it's worked with internships is you get some friend say, hey, my niece is at Brown, she wants to learn about publishing, can she work for you this summer? Don't worry about paying her. But, you know, not everyone can afford to work for free, you know, in college. So, but I think a lot of publishers are starting initiatives to seek out, you know, diverse employees. You know, like Retha Power left a city college to become an editor at Holt. So, I mean, it's happening. I mean, the will is there.
Another point is, you were saying with diversity, the book "The Help" by Catherine Stockett. She was actually, if I remember the beginning correctly, and someone please correct me, but I remember that she had a letter of recommendation, and the editor and the previous employer had said, the editor, your writing needs to be improved, and she was able to push her way, and just be persistent with it. So there is definitely a way to get that voice out there and get there to whatever your goals is, whether it's freelancing, being an agent, being an editor, and whatnot. The one interesting question was, what book clubs are the panel participate in? And as a little plug with the Women's National Book Association, we are on a national level. We have a book club every month. So our members from any of our 11 chapters are allowed to join that book club. And we take from the Great Groups Reads list that is compiled by a committee every year. So Deborah, let's start with you. Are you in any book clubs particularly right now, or any other ones you want to make a little plug for?
I wish I did. I don't belong in any book clubs. I'll join some.
Eric, any book clubs you're in?
I've been in a book club for 30 years, I think, which it's like a busman's holiday, I guess. When I finish reading for work, I go and read for the book club. And yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly important, especially as a publishing professional, to always be reading for pleasure. And it's difficult to make the time because we have so much reading that we have to do of our clients' material and of incoming material. But I feel like if I'm not reading for pleasure, I forget what the feeling is like. And the best possible feeling is when you get a submission and you're reading a manuscript and the line between pleasure reading and work reading vanishes. That's when you know that you're onto something.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I think one of the great joys of reading communally, and them being able to get together with people and talk about the book, whether you liked it or not. And sometimes those conversations are more interesting when there is fundamental disagreement about the books.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, I just want to get to Clevis real quick. Are you in any book clubs?
I was gonna say, don't skip me.
Oh,
No, of course not.
I'm like the #1 nerd. I was gonna be mad at you, Harriet.
oh, sorry.
No, I'm in two book clubs. One I've been in for about 15 years. It used to be like my roommate, and all we did was drink. I mean, we did read the book, but it was, I think it's so interesting because I joined another one last year, and it was because we wanted to read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, and it's such a heavy book that there were like 3 of us that had posted around the same time on social media, and we're all writers. And we ended up, and I have a few friends who are down in Georgia, one lives in Mississippi. And we were just like, oh, we need to read this book together because it's kind of crazy, the things you didn't know. And it's horrifying, right?
That was a great book. Yeah, I listened to it, but
it's a great book. It is. So then after that, we had such a good time because, the thing about being a writer and reading, like we really talk about the craft and talk about what's working. And my other book club, which is just my girlfriends, it's also pleasurable, to be in that book club. But there's something to be said about just, I read all the time, and I just love books and I love recommending books. So if you are not in a book club, start one.
I need a new book club. I was in 2 book clubs and then invited to another one, but it's all Zoom. I need a new book club.
Sally, I'm going to invite you to mine, okay?
Okay, great.
When did you say recommended book stack that you promised us?
Yes,
that
all right,
book stack,
that'll be our last thing.
Okay.
Flavis?
Yes, the book stack.
I'm ready. Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
So I have What's Mine and Yours by Naima Coster, who just came out yesterday. I read it because I'm going to do a podcast with her. Blew me away. I have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a YA book. And let me tell you something. If you're not reading YA yet, get on it. They're great. They're pleasurable. They're quick. Loved it. Julia Alvarez is one of my favorite writers of all time.
Oh,
The
yes.
Butterflies. If you have, this
Uh-huh.
is so beautiful. Read it.
Yes.
Dominicana by Angie Cruz.
Oh,
I
Angie
love this
Cruz.
book.
Yep.
This book like reminded me so much of my mom and my own immigration story.
yeah,
It's a great book. And then the last one is An American Marriage by
Yes.
Tayari Jones.
Yes, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
all of these books I love because I think they're the kind of books that just grab you. They don't let you go. They make you laugh. They make you cry. They transport you. So if you've been having a hard time, like getting back into reading, start here.
yeah. So I want to thank everybody, thank our panelists so much. Sally and Deborah and Clavis and Eric, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our panel. You were so popular. We were sold out and we had a waiting list and you came through. It was a very fabulous, interesting panel, great people, and we appreciate so much you're giving your time and energy to us so that we then can appreciate writing and reading in this very difficult time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Rachel and everybody else for
You're welcome.
Chandra